Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are, and welcome to this session of the Australian Space Biology and Health Symposium. My name is Emmanuel Urquieta, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, and I'm also a faculty member at Baylor College of Medicine in the Department of Emergency Medicine and the Center for Space Medicine. And today I'm going to be talking to you about commercial spaceflight and new space analogs from the TRISH perspective. But before we get into the specific analogs, I just wanted to cover where we are going. And this is from a NASA and TRISH perspectives. Where we're now on low Earth orbit, we have been there for the last 20 years, and a lot of people have been constantly there day after day, night after night, without any major medical issues. But in the 2024 timeframe, NASA is planning to go back to the moon as part of the Artemis missions. And this is a test ground to prove technologies and to prove new capabilities so that in the 2030s timeframe, we can go then to Mars. And this is sort of the pathway that NASA and TRISH are following so that we can keep developing capabilities at different more challenging places such as the moon. So then with the end goal of going to Mars. Now, I'm gonna first cover what we call new Artemis analogs, and these ones are specific for missions to the moon. I'm sure that you all heard about the Inspiration 4 mission a few months ago. It was the first all-civilian orbital mission that launched on September 15. And we at TRISH were able to deploy 5 projects into that mission. I'm going to cover a little bit of the specifics on this mission and why this is extremely important for the future of spaceflight. But why is this an Artemis analog mission? Well, the crew composition is the same as we will look on Artemis missions, 4 crew members. The duration of the mission was a 3-day orbital mission around the Earth. And during the first missions to the moon, the transit between the Earth and the moon is going to be roughly 3 days. And also the volume of the capsules, in this case, the SpaceX Dragon capsule, is very similar to the volume that we will see on the Orion capsules when we go to the moon. So from that perspective, this is a really good analog to understand how 4 crew members being isolated and confined within these volumes for 3 days will react, and what are some potential issues and capabilities that we will need to develop for these types of missions. So this was a really good analog for this type of early Artemis missions. Now we're also working, TRISH is working not only with SpaceX, but also with most of the commercial spaceflight providers. And just in the last few months, we have seen an explosion of spaceflight companies really proving new capabilities, and this is really the new era of spaceflight. It's really the new chapter of human space biomedical research and spaceflight in general. There are 3 other companies that TRISH is engaging with. One of them is Blue Origin. They are working mainly on suborbital flights, and I'm going to mention 2 examples, and these are 2 of the examples of the youngest and the oldest people flying to space. But they're also planning to go to low Earth orbit and to the moon. So this is a good platform for TRISH as well. We're also working with Axiom. Axiom Space is a company that is looking to building their own space station, first building a module that will dock into the current space station, and then having their own space station in low Earth orbit. And then finally, Space Adventures. This is a company that is a US company, but they work with Roscosmos, with the Russians. And in fact, Space Adventures has been in the business for probably the longest. They have been flying civilians to space for many years now. And there's a new mission on December 8th that TRISH is going to be participating, and I want to mention that going forward. So these are the main participants that TRISH is engaging with in commercial spaceflight, and I'm going to describe why this is important specifically, as we need to develop new capabilities for the moon and Mars. But we're not only looking at new analogs and new commercial spaceflight opportunities. We're also looking at terrestrial analogs that resemble the constraints for missions both to the moon and Mars. And one of them is the Australian Antarctic Space Analog. And TRISH has been working on getting capabilities and being able to work together with the Australian Antarctic Division on Artemis relevant missions there. And I'm going to cover a very specific example at the end of this presentation. And this is something that we're still working with them to be able to have access to these capabilities. And likely next year, we'll be having access to these very, very unique platforms. But before I get into the specifics of our commercial spaceflight program, what makes our program unique, I just want to briefly cover the last 60 years of human space. And this is really the entire history of human spaceflight. As you remember, the first flight was in 1961 with Yuri Gagarin, and then Alan Shepard on the first suborbital flights. But really, since 1961, only roughly 550 humans have been in space. It's not a large number. And if we look at the diversity, both from a demographics and a gender perspective, it is really not diverse. Most of the people who have flown to space have been white American males. And just on the left side, you can see, I call it lack of diversity, because only 67 out of the 550 have been women, 17 have been African Americans, and 34 have been Asian. So we're looking at 12, 3, and 6% of diversity here. And as we move into the next chapter of human spaceflight, which is commercial spaceflight, there is an absolutely incredible opportunity to not only increase the number of people flying to space, but also how diverse they are. And this is going to be absolutely critical as we develop new capabilities from the machine learning and artificial intelligence perspectives. These type of capabilities require massive data sets that are not only large in the number of samples, but also diverse, so that the algorithms that they develop, they can be applicable to anybody going into space, including looking into how we can personalize and predict the medical treatment in spaceflight. So I am absolutely convinced that commercial spaceflight will bring us that opportunity. So as I was saying, just in the last few months, we have seen a lot of people going into space from the commercial spaceflight perspectives. And for this reason, Trish has been developing for the last 6 to 7 months the EXPAND program. And this is enhancing exploration platforms and analog definition. And this is a capability to first to implement research, standardized research protocols in commercial spaceflight by commercial spaceflight participants, also collecting the medical data from them, collecting biobank samples from them, blood, saliva, urine, stools, and other samples, and then standardizing them, normalizing them, and storing at a coded and de-identified database that is housed at Baylor College of Medicine. But the end goal is not for us to keep the information, but excuse me, but to share this information with investigators that might be interested on accessing this data to developing further capabilities. So this is the core capability and the core program that we have been developing for the last 7 months. Now, we understand that commercial spaceflight participants are very different from your professional astronauts. Number one, they have daytime jobs, so their work is not being an astronaut, so they cannot train for as long as professional astronauts do. And they're actually paying to go to space. So every single thing that they take into space, they are paying to take that. So if we ask them to bring any research or any payloads that will be for research purposes, they will be to the cost of them taking something else into space. So with that in mind, we want to make this program as easy as possible from an implementation and time perspective. So you see here that there are 3 packages. So the basic one is the essentials package, and this requires minimal crew time and OBMAS, also minimal training. Then the next level is benchmarking, which requires a little bit more crew time and OBMAS. And finally is the expeditionary, that includes more testing. And of course, it also requires more crew time in the 3 different phases of flight, pre, in, and post-flight. But these ones are potentially groundbreaking studies, things that have never been done in space before, but they, at one point, they will need to be done so that we can finally get answers to some of the questions in human space biomedical research. So we're trying to understand is how a person that is not peak performing from a physiological perspective. What I mean by this is that a person that perhaps has some type of medical conditions before going to space, as opposed to a professional astronaut from an agency that has been highly screened and don't have a lot of medical conditions. So by having access to this population, the spaceflight participants with medical conditions, then we can understand how not a peak functioning physiology in a challenging environment such as spaceflight, how is that going to impact, and how is the pre-existing medical condition will evolve with the exposure in spaceflight. So this really will help us to understand edge cases and will prepare us for the unknowns. There are a lot of things that we that we're trying to prepare for spaceflight. We call them the red risks. Those are the high priority areas of research. But there will be some conditions and some situations that we didn't even think that they could happen in spaceflight. And we call those ones the unknown unknowns. And these type of platforms, these type of capabilities really will allow us to have a better understanding of additional things that then we will have to consider for spaceflight. And going back to the diversity of participants, you can see here some of these examples. On the upper left corner, you can see the inspiration for a mission. It's a 50-50 male-female ratio. You also have one African American and the first cancer survivor and a prosthetic patient going into space. Then on the upper right corner, you can see the youngest people going into space. On the lower right corner, you can see the oldest people going into space. And on the lower left corner, you can see two of the crew members of the Japanese mission, the MS-20 mission on December 8th of this year. So really just in the last 5 months, we have seen a lot of firsts in spaceflight. And this is just starting. So this is absolutely incredible to be working in this during this period of time. And the first example, the first implementation of the EXPAND program that I was mentioning was during the Inspiration for mission on September 15. So we deployed multiple technologies and multiple capabilities looking at the constraints of spaceflight and trying to optimize the use of these technologies. And also, as I was mentioning, which is absolutely critical, reducing as much as possible the training requirements and the OBMAS that will have to go with these people into space. So we're looking at health physiology, we're looking at neurocognitive performance using the cognition test battery that NASA uses in spaceflight. We also flew a miniaturized ultrasound device that is plugged to a cell phone, and it has artificial intelligence guidance capabilities to obtain good quality images. And the use cases that we looked at are absolutely relevant to spaceflight. Number one was looking at the optic nerve as it relates to spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome. We also looked at the internal jugular vein and the bladder. We also collected blood and saliva in flight, and we were able to test a new technology, the vertical flow paper-based device, so that in real time, within 10 minutes, we're able to test some biomarkers in spaceflight. Just with a few drops of blood and saliva. We also collected dry blood spots in space. We also collected multiple biosamples, blood, saliva, urine, stools, skin swabs, and environmental swabs before and after flight. And these, again, will be frozen and will be stored at Baylor College of Medicine so that we can share them after we have a minimum number of participants in the database so that we can safely code and de-identify the data. And then finally, sensory motor testing. This is one of the most critical things that we need to solve before we can safely go back to the moon. So another unique thing about this SpaceX mission is that when they come back to Earth, they do a splashdown. They do not do a landing on a surface. And the Orion capsule is going to be landing in the same way through a splashdown. So there are a lot of capabilities that again makes this a really good Artemis analog for these types of missions from a lot of perspectives, even from the sensory motor perspective. These are the 4 crew members on the Inspiration for mission. And I was mentioning that we are already working on 2 additional missions. The first one is on December 8th. This is the MS-20 mission that is going to be flying 2 Japanese civilians into space. They're going to stay on orbit for roughly 12 days, launching on December 8th. And Trish is deploying pre and post flight measurements in this mission. And we're also working with Axiom Space for the Axiom 1 mission on February 21st. These are the 4 crew members, and they as well will be on staying on ISS for multiple days. And we have been fortunate enough to be able to work with them and also collect data from them. So really, in a matter of just a few months, we'll be able to collect a very decent number of spaceflight participants, data from these spaceflight participants. And this business is just starting. So I am absolutely convinced that in the next perhaps 5 to 10 years, there's going to be an exponential growth on how many people from the commercial and civilian side will fly into space. And before I finish my presentation, I just wanted to briefly cover a new analog that, again, we are trying to work to have access with the Australian Antarctic Division. And this is an Artemis medical analog. So the Australian Antarctic Division is working on getting ice cores from Antarctica so that they can finally solve the question if there is or there's not global warming. And the Europeans are doing the same. So they're drilling a very deep cores of ice so that they can do the analysis later. But what makes this absolutely unique from the medical perspective is what I'm going to show you on the next slide. And it is how similar this is to the medical concept of operations that we will have to work with for missions to the moon during the early Artemis missions. So, in Artemis missions, the medical guidance and medical support will be almost in real time from Houston Mission Control. And in the case of the Antarctic missions, they have Hobart. In Hobart, Australia, they have their medical decision support. So that is really the equivalent of the medical support in Houston. Now let's imagine that we are on the moon. On the early Artemis missions, there's going to be the lunar gateway that you can see here. That gateway is going to be orbiting the moon. Probably 2 crew members are going to stay there, and 2 crew members will actually land on the surface of the moon to do some walks and surface exploration there. So what makes this again very unique is that there's going to be tents where some of the operations are going to be coordinated, and there's going to be scientists going out of the tent into the field, and they will be physically drilling the cores. So if you can imagine, we can have now not only people that will look like mission control, but also people in the tents that will be your equivalent as the crew members on the gateway around the moon. And then the scientists that will be doing the surface science, both on the moon and Antarctica, they're always equivalent here. So if there's a medical scenario, you will have to go not directly between the Earth and the surface of the moon, but through the gateway. So this is a very similar scenario here that we will be able to have access, hopefully in the next year or so. So these are the type of analogs that we will need to develop and we'll need to have access to so that we can finally test technologies and capabilities, number one, for the moon on the way to Mars. So thank you for your time. I know this is not a live presentation, but this is my email, and I will be happy to answer any questions if you send me an email. Thank you very much.